Have you ever sat in the quiet stillness of a sanctuary, bowing your head to recite the words you have known since childhood, only to feel a profound and suffocating emptiness the moment you say Amen? You fold your hands, you ask for your daily bread, you plead for forgiveness, and yet, instead of a divine connection, you are met with a chilling silence. For decades, you may have blamed yourself. You may have thought your faith was too weak, your devotion too fragile, or your sins too heavy. But what if I told you that your existential exhaustion is not a flaw in your soul, but the direct result of a calculated historical theft? The Roman Catholic Church went to great lengths to erase the true original ending of the Our Father prayer from every altar and pulpit on earth. They did not do this because of a simple translation error or the natural decay of ancient manuscripts. They deliberately silenced the final Aramaic lines because those specific words contained a dangerous spiritual technology. They buried it for 2,000 years because if you were allowed to speak that ending, you would instantly realize you are not a broken sheep carrying original sin, desperate to be shepherded by an external authority. Their entire empire of power, an empire built on your manufactured guilt and existential fear, would collapse the very moment you remembered who you truly were. You have been handed a fragmented script and told it was the complete truth. The gatekeeper elite of the early centuries recognized that the original prayer taught by Yeshua was not a petition to a distant, judgmental king sitting on a throne in the sky. It was a closed circuit of divine energy, an activation code designed to awaken the Christ consciousness within your own physical body. But to maintain their totalitarian grip on humanity, to ensure you would always need their priests, their rituals, and their massive stone buildings, they severed the connection. They cut the prayer short. They replaced the profound realization of your inherent inner power with a word of submission. Amen. A word that simply means, so be it. A word that closes the door and leaves you standing outside in the cold, waiting for a Savior who they claim can only be accessed through their approved channels. This is not a baseless theory born from modern cynicism. This is the unmasking of a 2,000-year system of thought control. When you look back at the origins of institutional religion, you do not find a pure desire to liberate the human spirit. You find men terrified of the divine spark that resides within you. They curated a theology that magnified your flaws and sold you the exclusive cure. By altering the most widely spoken prayer in human history, they transformed a tool of absolute spiritual sovereignty into a daily reinforcement of your own unworthiness. Every time you recite the edited version, you are unknowingly tightening the chains of a spiritual prison. You are projecting your innate power outward into the void, feeding a matrix of dogma that thrives on your submission. But that deception is unraveling today. The ancient intuition in your marrow has always known that a massive piece of the puzzle was missing. That is why you are here. That is why the standard sermons no longer satisfy your hunger for the truth. You are ready to step out of the shadows of historical cover-ups and reclaim the forbidden wisdom that was stolen from your ancestors. Prepare yourself, because once you hear the words they tried to burn, you can never go back to being a passive follower. To truly comprehend the magnitude of this spiritual theft, you must first understand the anatomy of the historical deception that took place in the year 325. The Roman Empire was fracturing under the weight of its own immense corruption and division. Emperor Constantine was a ruthless political strategist and a military conqueror. He was not a theologian. He was not a mystic seeking the face of the divine. He was a dictator, desperately searching for a mechanism to unify his collapsing territories. He realized that military might could only control the physical bodies of his subjects, but a unified, standardized religion could control their minds for generations to come. Thus, he convened the Council of Nicaea. You have been taught to view this gathering as a holy assembly of pious men divinely inspired to compile the ultimate truth of God. But history tells a much darker and more calculated story. It was a political summit designed to construct a 2,000-year system of thought control. Imagine a room filled with a gatekeeper elite of the early centuries. These mortal men took it upon themselves to decide the fate of human consciousness. They sifted through hundreds of ancient manuscripts and eyewitness accounts of the life and teachings of Yeshua. They were not looking for spiritual liberation. They were looking for compliance. Any text that suggested a direct and unmediated connection with the Creator was immediately branded as dangerous. The profound esoteric manuscripts that taught the individual how to awaken the Christ consciousness within their own body were systematically suppressed. The gatekeepers ordered the original Aramaic teachings to be hidden and eventually destroyed. They burned the sacred scrolls that held the keys to your spiritual sovereignty. They silenced the mystical voices of the early desert fathers who knew that the true kingdom of heaven was a frequency you could access right here and right now. Why did they fear these specific texts so deeply? Why did they go to such extraordinary lengths to erase the final lines of the Lord's Prayer? The answer lies in the threat of absolute spiritual independence. The original ending of the prayer completed a circuit of divine energy within the human vessel. It stated that the Spirit and the light of the Creator were forever breathing through you. If the masses were allowed to know that the breath in their lungs was the literal breath of the cosmos, they would realize they possessed an inherent and undeniable divinity. If you knew that the Supreme Light was already awake inside your own awareness, you would never kneel before another man in a robe. You would never fear a distant, punishing deity. You would never believe that you needed to cross a threshold of cold stone buildings to speak to the source of all life. You would realize that you are the living temple. The entire ecclesiastical empire was built on a foundation of your perceived separation from God. If they allowed the original prayer to remain intact, their monopoly on salvation would evaporate overnight. To ensure their absolute authority, the gatekeepers had to invent a problem so they could exclusively sell you the cure. This was the birth of the most insidious psychological weapon ever wielded against humanity: the doctrine of original sin. They took the profound and liberating teachings of a mystic master and flattened them into a matrix of dogma. They fabricated a spiritual disease and convinced you that you were born infected with it. From the moment you took your first breath, they told you that you were flawed and broken and inherently unworthy. They crammed this concept into your head as a form of mass brainwashing. By editing the sacred texts and clipping the wings of the most powerful prayer ever spoken, they created an open loop of endless dependency. Every time you asked for forgiveness in the way they instructed you, subconsciously reinforced your own guilt. You projected your power outward into a void, hoping a distant king would hear your plea and grant you a temporary reprieve from your manufactured shame. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of that invisible guilt as you sat in a congregation? Have you ever wondered why a lifetime of devotion and obedience still left you feeling empty and alienated from the divine presence? Your exhaustion is the natural result of operating within a system designed to drain your spiritual battery. They turned the living transmission of Yeshua into a religious ritual that demands endless submission. They transformed a path of inner awakening into a prison without bars. It is heartbreaking to think of the billions of innocent souls who have lived and died in the torment of this implanted fear. Generations of men and women who possess the dormant DNA of the cosmos, yet spent their entire lives begging for a grace they already owned. They were deprived of humanity's greatest privilege simply to protect the political and financial thrones of a select few. The Council of Nicaea did not just organize a religion, they orchestrated an identity assassination. They took Yeshua, who taught his followers to become the light, and they turned him into an unreachable idol to be worshipped from afar. They buried the truth that he came to show you how to activate your own divine genetic code. Instead of teaching you to become the Christ, they conditioned you to worship the Christ while remaining trapped in your own perceived insignificance. They erased the instructions for the activation of your pineal gland and your inner vision. They censored the knowledge that your body is a sacred technology capable of holding the frequency of the highest realm. The gatekeeper elite knew exactly what they were doing when they replaced the empowering Aramaic conclusion with a simple word of closure. They wanted to make sure that the circuit of your prayer reached out into the empty sky and fell back to earth unanswered. But truth is an immortal seed. You can bury it under the weight of empires. You can obscure it with centuries of theological manipulation. You can hunt down the mystics and burn their parchment scrolls. But the vibration of the original teaching never truly dies. It has been echoing in the background of human history, waiting for the moment when the collective consciousness was ready to break free from the matrix of dogma. The fact that you feel a deep and undeniable resonance with these words is the ultimate proof that the programming is failing. The spiritual trauma inflicted by the historical cover-up is beginning to heal the moment you recognize it for what it is. You are standing at the edge of a profound cognitive shock. The walls of the 2,000-year system of thought control are cracking. You are realizing that the historical deception was not just an attack on ancient texts. It was a direct attack on your mind and your potential. The gatekeepers tried to steal your spiritual sovereignty, but they could not extinguish the flame of gnosis that burns quietly in your marrow. The truth was not preserved in the golden vaults of the Vatican or beneath the marble floors of towering cathedrals. The ultimate spiritual technology of human liberation was kept safe by the dry, unforgiving sands of the Egyptian desert. Let us travel back to the month of December, in the year 1945. The world was distracted by the chaotic aftermath of a global war. Yet a much quieter, far more monumental event was about to unfold at the base of a jagged cliff called Jabal al-Tarif. Near the remote town of Nag Hammadi, an illiterate Arab farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was driving his camel across the barren landscape. He was searching for sabach, a nitrate-rich soil used as fertilizer for his crops. He drove his heavy mattock into the earth, expecting nothing but dust and stone. Instead, his blade struck something hard. It was not a rock. It was a massive, sealed, red earthenware jar, nearly a meter tall. Muhammad Ali hesitated. In the ancient folklore of his people, such sealed vessels often contained a jinn, a vengeful spirit trapped for centuries in the dark. But the desperate hope for hidden gold overcame his superstitious fear. He raised his mattock and smashed the jar to pieces. What fell out onto the red dirt was not gleaming gold, but something that possessed the power to shatter the foundations of the most powerful religious empire on earth. 13 leather-bound papyrus codices tumbled into the blinding sunlight. They had been sleeping in the silence of the desert for 1,600 years. Muhammad Ali did not know how to read. He had no idea that his dilapidated tool had just cracked open the greatest theological cover-up in human history. He gathered the fragile books, wrapped them in his tunic, and carried them home. End quote. The universe possesses a profound sense of irony. The unadulterated words of Yeshua, the exact teachings the gatekeeper elite had desperately tried to eradicate, were rescued from oblivion by a peasant who could not decipher a single letter. What happened next is a tragic metaphor for how humanity has historically treated sacred wisdom. Muhammad Ali dumped the priceless manuscripts onto the floor of his humble home. His mother, seeking fuel to heat her outdoor oven, took some of the brittle, decaying pages of the oldest surviving records of human divinity and tossed them into the fire to bake bread. Pages of unimaginable power, texts that could have freed millions from the agonizing grip of original sin, were literally burned to ash to warm a simple meal. Yet, the core of the library survived. Through a chaotic sequence of events involving blood feuds, black market antiquities dealers, and secretive transactions, the surviving texts slowly made their way into the hands of scholars. When the brilliant minds of the era finally began to translate the ancient Coptic script, a language descending directly from the pharaohs, a profound silence fell over the academic world. These were not ordinary texts. This was the Nag Hammadi Library, 52 mystical treatises, including the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Secret Book of John. They were pristine. They were completely unedited by the political strategists of the Council of Nicaea. They were the raw, breathing essence of a spiritual revolution that the architects of the matrix of dogma had spent centuries trying to hunt down and destroy. To understand why these books were buried, we must look back to the dark days of the late 4th century. In the year 367, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria issued a harsh and uncompromising decree. He circulated a letter commanding that only the approved, heavily sanitized books of the newly formed canon could be read by the masses. He ordered the immediate destruction of all secret or apocryphal writings. He labeled them as heresy, a psychological weapon used to instill fear in anyone who dared to seek a direct connection with the Creator outside the walls of the church. The ecclesiastical authorities dispatched their enforcers to cleanse the monasteries and burn the spiritual heritage of the early seekers. But some unnamed monks, likely from the nearby Pachomian monastery, recognized the impending tragedy. They knew that if the institutional church succeeded, the light of Gnosis would be extinguished forever. Under the cover of darkness, these brave souls took the sacred scrolls, sealed them in the red clay jar, and buried them deep in the desert. They trusted that the earth would protect the truth until a future generation was ready to receive it. Those monks did not bury a religion. They buried a map to human sovereignty. They preserved the original frequency of the Christ consciousness, hoping that one day, long after the empire of Rome had crumbled, someone would dig up the keys to the spiritual prison. When you read the translations of the Nag Hammadi texts, the cognitive shock is immediate and overwhelming. You instantly realize why the gatekeepers were absolutely terrified of these words. In the standard canonical Bible, Yeshua is portrayed as an unreachable deity demanding worship, sacrifice, and endless obedience to an external authority. But in the forbidden Coptic papyri, a completely different figure emerges. The Yeshua of Nag Hammadi does not ask you to build massive cathedrals. He does not ask you to submit to a hierarchy of priests. He does not speak a single word about the fabricated disease of original sin. In the Gospel of Thomas, there are 114 direct sayings of the Master, free from the narrative manipulations of later theologians. At Logion 3, he delivers a message that dismantles the entire premise of the Roman Catholic Church. He says, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you, and it is outside you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty." Read those words again, and let them resonate deep in your marrow. The kingdom is within you. It is not a geographical location you visit after you die, provided you have paid your dues to the church and begged for sufficient mercy. It is a state of total awareness. It is a frequency of consciousness that you can activate right now, in this very breath. If the kingdom is within you, then the Vatican is entirely obsolete. The popes, the bishops, the elaborate rituals, the confessions of guilt, they all become completely unnecessary. The gatekeeper elite built an empire of staggering wealth and absolute power by inserting themselves as the mandatory toll booth between you and the Creator. They convinced you that you were too dirty, too sinful, and too broken to speak directly to the source of all life. They told you that you needed their specific sacraments to cleanse your inherently flawed soul. But the Nag Hammadi texts obliterate this historical lie. They reveal that the divine spark, the pure, unblemished light of the cosmos, has always been hidden safely deep within your physical vessel. You do not need to be saved by an institution. You need to be awakened by your own inherent wisdom. The spiritual technology contained in these desert scrolls teaches you how to look inward, how to peel back the heavy layers of societal conditioning, and how to recognize your own face in the pure reflection of the divine. The systematic suppression of these texts was the most calculated assassination of human potential ever orchestrated. In the Gospel of Philip, Another forbidden manuscript pulled from the clay jar, the writer explicitly states a truth that shakes the foundations of traditional theology. The text reveals that the ultimate goal of the seeker is not to be a Christian, but to become a Christ. The canonical texts demand that you remain a permanent inferior, forever bowing to a supreme Savior while identifying yourself as a miserable sinner. But the esoteric teachings found in the Egyptian sands present a radically different and incredibly empowering path. They teach that Yeshua was not an anomaly to be worshipped from afar, but a divine template to be replicated within yourself. He was a master who had fully activated his divine genetic code, and he was desperately trying to teach his followers how to do the exact same thing. This is the ultimate gnosis. This is the secret transformative knowledge that the architects of the ecclesiastical matrix could not allow you to possess under any circumstances. If you truly understood that you hold the exact same divine potential as the mystic from Galilee, you would never again let any man in a robe dictate your spiritual worth. You would shatter the illusion of your own limitations in a single moment of clarity. The fear of hellfire, the primary psychological tool of manipulation used by the dogmatic institutions, would lose all its paralyzing power over your mind. You would stand tall as a fully sovereign being, radiating the brilliant light of the original temple from within. The monumental discovery at Nag Hammadi was not a random coincidence of history. The universe operates on a precise and intentional rhythm, and these ancient texts were unearthed at the exact moment when the collective consciousness of humanity was finally beginning to question the rigid, oppressive structures of dogmatic authority. The undeniable fact that these fragile documents survived the relentless, bloody purging of the Roman Empire, survived the harsh and destructive elements of the Egyptian desert, and survived the mindless fire of a peasant oven is nothing short of miraculous. It is a breathtaking testament to the indestructible, persistent nature of truth. The modern gatekeepers of Orthodox religion have tried desperately to dismiss the Nag Hammadi library as mere Gnostic heresy, labeling it as a collection of confused and dangerous mystical musings that should be ignored by the faithful. They have spent decades funding and publishing academic papers, attempting to minimize the devastating, paradigm-shifting impact of these texts. But their desperate efforts to maintain control are failing right before our eyes. The massive matrix of dogma is crumbling under the weight of its own historical contradictions. Every single time a genuine seeker like you listens to these forbidden words, another deep crack appears in the cold stone walls of their 2,000-year-old spiritual prison. You are the living, breathing continuation of those incredibly brave monks who hid the scrolls in the dark of night. By embracing the esoteric knowledge they fought and died to preserve, you are bringing their ultimate mission to its glorious fulfillment. When you finally comprehend the sheer, staggering scale of what was deliberately hidden in those 52 papyrus books, a profound cognitive shock washes over your entire being. You look back at your long decades of faithful attendance in imposing sanctuaries, the countless hours spent kneeling on hard wooden pews, the endless, mechanical repetition of prayers that always ended with a hollow submission to an invisible, angry judge in the sky. You remember the heavily manufactured guilt that weighed like an anchor on your chest, the constant, gnawing anxiety that you were never pure enough, never devoted enough, never truly worthy of the divine love that was supposedly unconditional, yet always came with a terrifying, impossible list of institutional demands. That deep exhaustion you felt, that quiet, desperate yearning for something authentic and real, was the dormant gnosis within you crying out against the heavy iron bars of its cage. The ecclesiastical system demanded your absolute, unquestioning surrender, but the ancient scrolls of Nag Hammadi demand your absolute, fearless awakening. They demand that you stand up and take full responsibility for your own spiritual evolution. This is not an easy or comfortable path to walk. It is always far more comforting to hand your power over to a priest and let him bear the heavy burden of your eternal soul. To step out of the shadows and into the blazing light of your own inherent divinity requires immense, unshakable courage. It requires you to confront the painful realization that the spiritual authorities you trusted have deliberately kept you blinded in the dark. But once you turn the decaying pages of this forbidden library in your mind, once you absorb the authentic, unfiltered voice of the Master who taught that you and the Creator are fundamentally, eternally one, the illusion of separation shatters permanently and cannot be rebuilt. You realize with absolute clarity that you were never the dirty, helpless sheep they told you you were. You are the infinite, eternal cosmos experiencing itself in a beautiful human form. The truth was buried in the desert sands for millennia, waiting patiently for your mind to be ready to receive it. And that moment is happening right now. To truly understand the magnitude of the theft committed by the gatekeeper elite, we must peel back the heavy, suffocating layers of translation that have buried the original teachings for 2 millennia. We must step out from under the shadow of the Roman Empire and return to the dusty roads of Galilee, to the exact phonetic vibrations spoken by the mystic master himself. Yeshua did not speak English. He did not speak the rigid, legalistic Latin of the Vatican, nor did he speak the intellectual, philosophical Greek of the early theologians. He spoke Aramaic. And Aramaic is not merely a language of communication. It is a language of vibration, a quantum technology of sound, where every syllable is a multi-dimensional map of human consciousness. When the architects of the matrix of dogma took the living, breathing Aramaic teachings and forced them into the tight, unyielding boxes of Greek and Latin, they committed an act of profound spiritual violence. It was like taking a magnificent, glowing, 3-dimensional holographic projection of the entire cosmos and flattening it into a dull, 2-dimensional black and white sketch. They stripped away the vibrational frequencies that were specifically designed to awaken the dormant DNA within your physical vessel. Why would the architects of this 2,000-year system of thought control intentionally alter the resonance of the most powerful prayer in human history? The answer is as simple as it is devastating. A living sound awakens a sovereign creator, but a dead, legalistic term produces a compliant, fearful subject. If they allowed you to speak the ancient frequencies, you would feel the divine spark igniting in your own marrow, and you would immediately realize that the cold stone buildings and the intermediary priests were completely obsolete. Let us begin to dismantle the deception by analyzing the very first words you were taught to recite. Our Father, who art in heaven. In the English translation, and in the Latin Pater Noster, these words instantly establish a hierarchy. They paint a psychological portrait of a patriarchal, biological father figure, a distant king sitting on a golden throne in a geographical location above the clouds, completely separate from the miserable, flawed human beings dwelling on the earth below. This translation perfectly serves the agenda of the ecclesiastical empire, reinforcing your perceived separation from the source. But when you bypass the censorship and look at the original Aramaic text preserved in the hidden scrolls, the word Yeshua used was Abun. Abun does not mean a human father. It cannot be reduced to a gendered authoritarian figure. Abun is a spectacular, expansive concept that translates more accurately to the divine birther of the cosmos, the radiant emanation of life itself, or the primeval source of all breath. Let the phonetic reality of this word wash over you. When the ancient mystics intoned the word Abun, it was not a desperate plea spoken into the void. It was a physical, biological resonance practice. The sound of the letter A opens the chest. The vibrating B and W stimulate the lips and the vocal cords, and the resonant OON echoes deep within the cranial cavity, directly stimulating the pineal gland, the physical seat of your inner vision. Yeshua was not teaching his followers a song of submission. He was handing them a sonic key, a precise vibrational password designed to tune the human nervous system to the exact frequency of the Creator. Have you ever wondered why the Church insisted on praying in a dead language like Latin for centuries, punishing those who dared to seek the original meanings? They knew that if you vibrated the Aramaic sounds in your own chest, you would physically experience the undeniable truth that you are the original temple. You would feel the Abun breathing through your lungs, and the fabricated disease of original sin would evaporate like mist in the morning sun. The profound deception continues into the next phrase, "Who art in heaven." The Aramaic word used here is Shmaya. The gatekeepers want you to believe that heaven is a gated community in the sky, a VIP lounge for the obedient sheep who have blindly followed their institutional rules and paid their tithes. But Shmaya does not describe a physical place. In the ancient tongue, Shmim means light, sound, or vibration, and Aya means the center or the expansive manifestation. Therefore, Shmaya is the dimension of light and vibration, the unseen quantum reality that gives birth to the material world. It is the frequency of pure consciousness that exists everywhere, vibrating simultaneously within the darkest depths of the ocean and the deepest chambers of your own heart. When you say Abun de Boshmaya, you are not yelling up at the sky. You are aligning your mind with the radiant, creative source of all breath that is currently vibrating in the unseen dimension right here, right now, completely inside and around you. We then move to the phrase, "Hallowed be thy name." The word hallowed has been twisted to mean fear, revere, and blindly worship. But the Aramaic phrase is net kadash shmach. The root word kadash means to clear a space, to make a holy clearing, to sweep away the debris so that something sacred can enter. Yeshua was instructing you to sweep away the chaotic, anxious thoughts of the ego, to clear the heavy, toxic programming implanted by society, so that your physical body can become a pure, clean vessel for the frequency of the divine. It is an instruction for inner meditation, not an instruction to bow before an external altar. Next, you are taught to beg, "Give us this day our daily bread." The church loves this translation because it reduces you to a starving beggar, pleading for basic physical survival from a wealthy landlord. It reinforces the dynamic of a helpless child and a powerful parent. But the Aramaic word is lachma. While it can mean physical food, its deeper esoteric root refers to understanding, to spiritual nourishment, to the light of gnosis. The mystic is not begging for a loaf of bread to survive the afternoon. The mystic is declaring a readiness to receive the spiritual insight, the divine intelligence necessary to stay fully awake and aligned in the present moment. Give us the daily understanding to see through the matrix of dogma. Give us the exact frequency of light we need today to remember our inherent divinity amidst a world designed to make us forget. And then we arrive at the ultimate tool of psychological manipulation used by the dogmatic institutions. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. The ecclesiastical empire thrives on the concept of trespasses, debts, and sins. They need you to feel dirty. They need you to feel that you owe a massive, unpayable debt to God, a debt that can only be managed through their approved rituals, confessions, and unquestioning loyalty. But let us look at the Aramaic word Yeshua actually spoke. The word is chaubain. It does not mean a permanent stain on your immortal soul. It means tangled threads, hidden knots, or the energetic cords that bind you to past trauma and illusion. It refers to the frustrating, repetitive patterns of the unconscious mind. When you ask the source to untangle your chaubain, you are not a miserable sinner begging a judge to withhold a punishment of eternal hellfire. You are a sovereign being, asking the universal light to help you dissolve the energetic blockages in your own nervous system. You are asking to be released from the heavy, suffocating knots of resentment, regret, and the false beliefs that keep you trapped in a lower vibration. And you must release the tangled threads you hold against others, because holding on to that low-frequency anger prevents your own vessel from holding the high frequency of the Abun. It is a matter of energetic physics, not a matter of a moral scorecard kept by a punitive deity. How many billions of souls have lived and died in absolute terror of the next line? Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The church created an entire mythological universe of horned demons, pitchforks, and eternal lakes of fire to keep the masses paralyzed in fear. They personified evil as a cosmic supervillain actively trying to drag you into the dark, positioning themselves as your only fortress of protection. But the Aramaic language contains no such superstitious monsters. The word translated as evil is bisha. In the agrarian society of the ancient Middle East, bisha simply meant an unripe fruit. It meant an action that is untimely, a state of being out of alignment with the natural rhythm of creation, or the profound confusion that arises from a state of spiritual unconsciousness. To be delivered from bisha is not to be rescued from a red demon. It is to be pulled out of your own unripeness. It is a prayer for clarity, asking the divine light to lift you out of the tragic illusion of separation. It is a powerful affirmation designed to shatter the voices of the ego that tell you that you are small, weak, and powerless. You are asking to be delivered into the profound realization that you are the light itself. The men who sat at the Council of Nicaea knew exactly what they were doing when they transformed an unripe fruit into a terrifying cosmic enemy. A population terrified of an invisible monster will gladly surrender their freedom, their wealth, and their spiritual sovereignty to anyone claiming to hold the shield. By systematically mistranslating these precise Aramaic frequencies, the gatekeeper elite constructed a towering psychological prison. They took a profound, internal, meditative technology designed to fuse the human soul with the eternal cosmos, and they mutated it into a desperate petition for mercy submitted by a condemned prisoner. They severed the internal wires of your spiritual antenna and redirected them toward a false, external idol. Every time you recite the edited, westernized version of the prayer, you are unknowingly speaking the code of your own subjugation. You are reinforcing the very matrix of dogma that keeps you blind to your own staggering potential. But understanding the manipulation of these verses is only the preparation. It is the necessary clearing of the debris. As we have decoded the true frequencies of the Abun, the Shmaya, the Lachma, and the Bisha, we have begun to rebuild the ancient circuit. We have transformed the prayer from a plea of desperation into a vibrant, living architecture of light within the mind. Yet, an architecture, no matter how magnificent, remains empty if the power source is not connected. The profound linguistic revelations we have just explored are merely the first half of the equation. They represent the breath drawing inward, the opening of the physical and spiritual vessel. But a breath drawn in must eventually be exhaled. A circuit, to possess any real power, must ultimately be closed. For 2 millennia, seekers have spoken the opening lines of this transmission, sending their energy outward, waiting in the heavy silence for a completion that the Church explicitly forbade them to speak. They have stood at the edge of the ultimate spiritual realization, only to have the door slammed in their faces by a single, manufactured word of closure. The true, ancient mystics did not end their communion in a state of unresolved longing. They possessed the final sequence, the ultimate Aramaic frequency that acts as the seal of human divinity. The gatekeepers erased it, because they knew that once this specific vibration left your lips, you would never be a subject of Rome or any other institution, ever again. The circuit is waiting to be closed, and the forbidden words that complete the loop have finally been brought out of the darkness. The moment you reach the conclusion of the standard, heavily curated version of the prayer, you are instructed to bow your head, fold your hands, and seal your petition with a single, definitive word. Amen. You have been told that this word is a sacred affirmation, a holy stamp of approval upon your humble requests to the divine. But have you ever paused in the lingering silence that follows that word, and truly examined the physical and emotional sensation within your own chest? Does it feel like a profound connection has been forged, or does it feel like a heavy iron door has just been slammed shut in your face? The profound exhaustion you feel in that quiet void is not a symptom of your inadequate devotion. It is the biological and spiritual consequence of operating an open loop. The word Amen, in its institutional application, is a legalistic term of closure. It means, so be it, or it is finished. It is the language of a subordinate finalizing a transaction with a distant superior. By cementing this word at the end of the most powerful spiritual technology ever given to humanity, the gatekeeper elite successfully severed the living wire of your consciousness. They ensured that all the magnificent energy you generated through your focused intention was projected outward into the empty sky, leaving your physical vessel entirely drained and utterly dependent on their external matrix of dogma. What happens to a biological machine when its primary power source is deliberately severed by its operators? It becomes sluggish, confused, and desperate for an outside charge. This is the exact psychological state the 2,000-year system of thought control was designed to produce. The architects of this theological gap knew that a prayer ending in a sudden, outward termination would create a permanent state of spiritual starvation. You were conditioned to speak to the cosmos and then immediately hang up the spiritual telephone, passively waiting for a salvation that was always promised but never practically delivered. But the original Aramaic transmission, the untainted wisdom spoken by the mystic of Galilee, did not end with a sudden severing of the connection. It did not leave the seeker stranded in a state of unresolved longing. The true prayer was an unbroken circle. It was a perfectly designed quantum circuit that reached into the infinite and then deliberately, masterfully, folded back into the exact center of the human heart. When the fragile, decaying papyrus scrolls were pulled from the arid darkness of the Egyptian desert, scholars uncovered the magnificent final sequence that the Council of Nicaea had frantically tried to erase. The living circuit did not end with a submission to a distant throne. It culminated in a breathtaking recognition of profound, unshakable unity. The true Aramaic ending, the forbidden frequency that possesses the power to dismantle the entire ecclesiastical empire, translates to this: "For yours is the breath that moves through all things, and the light that remembers itself in me." Read those words again, and allow the sheer magnitude of their implication to penetrate the heavy layers of your societal conditioning. For yours is the breath that moves through all things, and the light that remembers itself in me. This is not a request. This is not a plea from a dirty, miserable sinner begging for a temporary reprieve from a manufactured disease of original sin. This is the ultimate declaration of absolute spiritual sovereignty. This is the exact moment the electrical circuit is closed. Let us dissect the profound anatomy of this forbidden ending, beginning with the breath. In the ancient texts, the word for spirit and the word for breath are entirely indistinguishable. The animating force that the institutional church turned into an abstract, unreachable ghost is, in reality, the very oxygen expanding your lungs at this exact second. When you speak the restored ending, you are acknowledging a staggering biological truth. You are recognizing that the breath flowing through your respiratory system is not your personal property. It is the exact same breath that hovered over the dark waters at the dawn of creation. It is the universal life force, the eternal Abun, constantly inhaling and exhaling through the temporary instrument of your physical body. The gatekeepers wanted you to believe that the spirit of the Creator was something you had to earn through rigorous obedience, something that was occasionally dispensed by a priest during a highly controlled ritual. But the forbidden Aramaic sequence reveals that you cannot be separated from the divine presence any more than a wave can be separated from the ocean. You are already breathing the cosmos. Why would the architects of the traditional doctrine go to such ruthless lengths to conceal a concept as beautiful as the breath? Because a human being who realizes they are actively breathing the eternal spirit cannot be convinced that they are fundamentally flawed. If the breath of the Supreme Being is the very engine of your cellular survival, then the concept of an inherited stain upon your soul is exposed as a grotesque historical lie. The entire foundation of their institutional authority rests upon your unquestioning belief in your own separation from the source. The moment you close the circuit and feel the divine breath within your own anatomy, their massive stone temples become nothing more than historical monuments to a fallen empire of control. We must then turn our attention to the second half of the forbidden equation, and the light that remembers itself in me. What is the nature of a light that possesses the capacity for memory? In the esoteric traditions of the ancient mystics, light is not merely the absence of physical darkness. Light is pure, unadulterated consciousness. It is the silent, observing awareness that looks out through your eyes. The church heavily conditioned you to look for the light outside of yourself. They painted glorious halos on distant saints and told you to worship the illumination of others while ignoring the dormant embers within your own mind. They systematically suppressed the spiritual technology required to activate the pineal gland, the physical doorway to your higher vision. But the original teaching clearly states that the universal light is not something you must endlessly seek in the external world. It is something that is already inside you, waiting to remember itself. You are not a separate entity trying to find the Creator. You are the Creator, experiencing the material realm through a specific, localized point of consciousness, momentarily suffering from a profound case of historical amnesia. When you recite the forbidden ending, you are actively triggering the cellular memory of your own divinity. You are striking the match in the dark room of your mind. Can you comprehend the sheer terror that this realization struck into the hearts of the doctrinal conservatives? Imagine an empire built on the lucrative business of selling maps to a hidden treasure. What happens to the wealth and power of the map makers when the people suddenly discover that the treasure has been buried in their own backyards the entire time? The ecclesiastical authorities knew that if the masses were ever allowed to speak the words of the closed circuit, the 2,000-year system of thought control would instantly evaporate. A population that knows the divine light is remembering itself within their own awareness has absolutely no need for a mediator. They have no need for rigid dogma, for fearful superstitions, or for the endless cycle of manufactured guilt and purchased salvation. They become completely sovereign. They become untouchable. This is why the ending was brutally amputated from the text. The erasure was not a passive accident of translation. It was a precise, surgical strike against the spiritual anatomy of the human race. For centuries, millions of seekers have spoken the truncated prayer, building up a massive reservoir of spiritual energy, only to bleed it out into the void with a final, submissive amen. They were transformed into spiritual batteries, generating power that they were never allowed to utilize for their own awakening. The intense sorrow of this historical tragedy is almost too heavy to bear. Think of your ancestors, kneeling on cold stone floors, desperately whispering into the silence, wondering why the heavens felt like brass. They were using a machine with a severed wire, completely unaware that the missing component had been deliberately hidden by the very men who claimed to be their spiritual shepherds. But the living transmission of the mystics is impossible to permanently destroy. You can burn the papyrus, you can exile the scholars, you can enforce a rigid matrix of dogma under the threat of punishment, but you cannot change the fundamental physics of the universe. The closed circuit has always existed in the silent spaces between your thoughts. The Desert Fathers, those who fled the corruption of the Roman institutions to practice the true gnosis in the wilderness, understood this perfectly. They did not merely recite the prayer. They used it as a rhythmic breathing practice. They would inhale the awareness of the universal breath, and they would exhale the heavy, false identity constructed by the ego. They became living, breathing circuits of divine electricity. They did not worship the Christ as an external idol. They engaged in the rigorous internal work required to become the Christ. You are standing at the threshold of a monumental paradigm shift. The cognitive shock of this revelation is designed to shatter the final remaining chains of your religious trauma. You are not simply learning a piece of suppressed history. You are being handed the exact code required to override the malware that was installed in your consciousness. The moment you choose to replace the open loop with the closed circuit, the entire dynamic of your spiritual life alters permanently. The prayer ceases to be a desperate petition thrown into the abyss. It becomes a mirror, reflecting your absolute perfection back to you. As the pieces of this ancient puzzle finally click into place, a new and profound realization begins to wash over you. If the words you have spoken every day of your life were meticulously edited to keep you asleep, what else has been hidden in plain sight? What other dormant powers are lying inactive within your physical vessel, waiting for the correct frequency to awaken them? The restoration of the closed circuit is not the end of the journey. It is merely the initiation. The gatekeeper elite hid this sequence because it acts as the master key that unlocks the deepest mysteries of your own biological temple. And now that you hold the key, the final barrier to your ultimate spiritual sovereignty is about to be breached. We have traversed the dark corridors of historical cover-ups and stood face to face with the gatekeeper elite who sought to sever your connection to the divine. Now we arrive at the threshold of your personal liberation. The heavy iron doors of the spiritual prison have been unlocked, but it is entirely up to you to push them open and step into the light of your own inherent divinity. The profound cognitive shock you are experiencing right now is not something to be feared. It is the sound of a 2,000-year system of thought control shattering within your mind. It is the death of the manufactured guilt that has kept you kneeling in the shadows of cold stone buildings. The theological architecture that told you that you were a broken, miserable sinner, completely dependent on the rituals of an external institution, is crumbling to dust at your feet. You are no longer bound by the matrix of dogma. You are stepping into the radiant, unmediated reality of the Gnosis. I invite you now to participate in the restoration of the ancient circuit. This is not a religious ceremony. This is a biological and spiritual activation. Wherever you are in this precise moment, I ask you to cease all distractions and simply sit in the quiet sanctuary of your own awareness. Place your hand over the center of your chest. Close your eyes and take a slow, deliberate breath. As you draw the air into your lungs, recognize that you are inhaling the Abun, the primeval source of all life. You are not breathing alone. The cosmos is breathing you. Feel the expansion in your ribcage and know that the exact same eternal spirit that moved over the waters of creation is moving through your physical vessel right now. And as you exhale, consciously release the heavy, tangled threads of the dogmatic illusions you have carried for so long. Exhale the fear of judgment. Exhale the anxiety of the original sin. Exhale the desperate need for an intermediary to grant you salvation. You do not need to be saved because you were never lost. You only suffered from a profound, historically imposed amnesia. Let us speak the words of the closed circuit together, not as a petition to a distant sky, but as the ultimate declaration of your sovereign truth. Speak it softly in the cathedral of your own mind, for yours is the breath that moves through all things, and the light that remembers itself in me. Let the resonance of that ancient Aramaic frequency vibrate in your marrow. The light of the Creator is no longer a distant star to be worshipped from afar. It has remembered itself inside your consciousness. The divine spark has ignited into a blazing fire. The process of becoming the Christ consciousness, the ultimate realization of your divine genetic code, has officially begun. You are the living, breathing temple, and the altar has always been your own heart. Millions of people have scrolled past this transmission to return to the gentle paralysis of their comforting illusions. They are not ready to bear the weight of their own absolute freedom. They prefer the familiar chains of the institutional doctrines because true sovereignty requires immense courage. But you are still here. You have listened to the whispers of the hidden manuscripts, and you have recognized the voice of the truth. That is not a coincidence. Your presence here is the fulfillment of an ancient intuition that has been crying out from the depths of your soul for decades. You are the remnant. You belong to the brotherhood of awakened souls who refuse to be shepherded by the architects of fear. You have chosen the narrow path of the mystic, the solitary journey back to the supreme source. If this flame has just been ignited within you, do not let the cold winds of the modern world extinguish it. It is time to make a formal vow to your own awakening. I am not asking you to blindly follow me, for you are your own master now. But I am asking you to leave a mark of your rebellion against the system that tried to keep you asleep. Scroll down to the sanctuary of the comments and assert your ultimate claim. Type the words, "I am awake." Let that simple phrase be the digital monument of your liberation. Let it serve as a beacon for the other silent seekers who will stumble upon this space, wandering in the dark, desperate for proof that they are not crazy, proof that the empty feeling they experience in the pews is shared by others. When they see your declaration, they will know they have finally found their spiritual family. The gatekeeper elite and the algorithms of this world do not want this esoteric knowledge to spread. They will actively attempt to suppress the voices that dismantle their 2,000-year monopoly on the human soul. Press the subscribe button and turn on the notifications, not to satisfy a metric, but as an act of defiance. Guarantee that the algorithm cannot hide the next profound revelation from your eyes. We have only just begun to decipher the fragments of the lost teachings. The ancient scrolls hold even more devastating secrets about the true nature of your reality, the hidden architecture of the universe, and the dormant powers resting quietly in your DNA. In our next encounter, we will unearth the ultimate mystery of the pineal gland, the physical doorway to the higher dimensions that the Council of Nicaea desperately tried to cement shut. Until that moment arrives, guard your inner light with absolute ferocity. Do not let the dogmatic conservatives pull you back into the shadows of their fear-based theology. Trust the quiet, steady voice of the Gnosis within you. Keep questioning the narratives you have been handed. Keep seeking the unadulterated origins of your faith, and never again surrender your magnificent spiritual sovereignty to any man, any institution, or any external throne. The matrix of dogma ends where your self-awareness begins. Go forward in peace. Walk with the profound dignity of the original temple. And remember, the light of the Creator is forever breathing through you.